Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Building Enablement. This is a web series where we talk to enablement professionals and dive deep into the details on programs, trainings, events, basically anything that they want to talk about, what they did and how they did it. I'm Stephanie Middaugh, and I lead enablement at Divvy, a financial tech startup out of the Utah area. And my guest today is Paul Butterfield. We're kind of neighbors-ish a little bit. We're both in the Utah area. Paul, how's it going?
It's going great. As much as anybody is neighbors anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
So Paul, I would love tell our guests a little bit more about yourself, what you're doing, where you're at.
I am currently with a also Utah-based company, as you mentioned, called Instructure. We are the leading platform for delivering online learning for K-12, higher ed, furthering education, that sort of thing. So it's a cool company to be involved in because we are truly mission driven. And right now during COVID, it's cool to be able to work for a company where we're actually able to really help do something about the changes that students and teachers are going through. I head up revenue enablement for Instructure, and we primarily have K-12 and higher ed sales teams, but we also have a division of the company called Bridge, which is a platform for employee development, and my team have responsibility for that as well.
Nice. So you have no shortage of things that you're covering.
We have many things we cover. Um, Fun fact about me that sometimes surprises people is back when Friends was actually still on TV, I had the chance to be on the set of Friends. They weren't there, but I've been to Central Perk. I've been in the girls' apartment. I've been in the guys' apartment. They're actually way smaller than you would think watching it on TV. Wide angle lenses are amazing things.
I
But that's
love
my
that.
fun
Did you
fact.
get to sit on the couch in the coffee shop?
Yes, I did.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. One of the things that I learned, it was one of those like today you learn kind of things online. I never noticed before that there was always a reserved like placard on like their area in Central Perk. I never saw that. And then when I went back and watched Friends, I saw it everywhere then because fans have always asked like, how do they always get this great section in like in the coffee shop? And there's a reserved placard right there on their table right in front of their
That's
couch.
funny.
So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Well, I love that. And so kind of transitioning gears a little bit into our topic for today, I'm really excited about it because I've actually talked to a number of people recently who are kind of in the process of exploring or reevaluating our topic today. So give us a little bit of insight as far as what it is that we're going to be focusing on today.
When you and I were talking earlier, one of the things that I think that we want to explore is sales methodology. And some people use the term sales process and sales methodology interchangeably. I don't. We could talk a little bit about that. But when looking to roll out a sales methodology, what are the critical components of a good sales methodology? How do you roll it out, customize it, and then ultimately, how do you drive adoption? Because otherwise, you wasted time.
Exactly. And this is definitely on any interview that I've ever been on in my career. They always ask, what's your sales methodology? What do you prescribe to? So this is definitely a hot topic for enablement because I know we hear it from leaders all the time. We hear it
Mhm.
from, if you're on the market, looking for a new position, which I know a lot of enablement folks are right now. That's usually a question that gets asked. So this is top of mind, I think, for a lot of enablement professionals. So I'm super excited to dive into this. And I know that when we were chatting in our prep session, you've done this a couple of times, which means, I don't want to use the word expert, but you are well versed in kind of how to get this done. So I'm excited to dive in. So when you're working with a methodology or you're going about either like bringing in a brand new one or transitioning one or whatever, what typically problems is it that you're trying to solve with this methodology?
It's different if you're bringing in a sales methodology for the first time versus doing a switch. So I'll start with bringing in the first time. Like everything, and again, you and I know each other, everything we do, you need to start with outcomes. If you don't understand the outcome, if you don't understand what success looks like, then it's very difficult to be sure you're evaluating the right things. In my experience, in fact, I feel very passionately about this. If you look at my LinkedIn headline, it says that I enable sales teams to differentiate by how they sell and win. We live in an experience economy. There are very few products that are so disruptive that they're going to sell themselves if you can just get them on the demo. And if you do have one of those, you look at Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, that's maybe 20% of the market max. So you've got to be good at offering an exceptional experience in addition to having a great product. And so when I look at a methodology, that's one of the first things I want to know. How are our salespeople going to be able to take this and then go and offer that exceptional, different experience? The other thing that I want to look at is how easy is it going to be for them to adopt it? We've all been through really great sales trainings. I spent some time at HP. HP would put together world-class trainings, for example. The problem with a lot of them is that you get super jazzed and you get out of there, and by Monday morning, you have to figure out, how am I going to apply what I heard and maybe even really liked, but how am I going to apply that to my book of business? Which means I have to not work on chasing my number, which means I'm not going to probably figure it out. And so if that didn't just come across, most of my career was spent in selling or leading sales teams. Sales enablement came a little bit later on for me. So those are probably the two biggest things, Stephanie, for me, right? Is those results of outcome-based selling and exceptional experience. And I guess that's part of it too. I didn't mention is part of offering that exceptional experience has to be helping a customer create a vision for themselves of how some set of capabilities that we offer will help them close the gap, go create better outcomes, make more money. Depends. Right now we sell to schools, right? They don't look at these things the way businesses do, but there are still things they need to solve, and there are still consequences if they can't solve them.
I think you touched on a couple of really interesting points there. Any methodology that I've been a part of, like rolling out, that's definitely one of the things, is the adoption piece is oftentimes forgotten or kind of put on the back burner a lot of times. So it's, you roll it out usually at like a kickoff is what I've usually been a part of, is like brand new year, brand new methodology, like everything's going behind here, and we get them all jazzed up and they're really excited about it. And then we come back to the office and there really aren't any like there isn't an instruction manual for them to go back and actually apply all of these things. And that's usually where like you'll need to come in with like your revenue operations team and build it and like fold it into all of your systems and your processes. Like in order for a methodology to kind of stick like that and work, you kind of need to fold it into every aspect of the sales reps' lives and show them how they can then use it as part of it too.
I absolutely agree. I would even suggest that the things you just mentioned all happened before that kickoff. If it needs to be gated in Salesforce, that's built, ready to turn on. If there is, there will be different messaging. In theory, if your sales reps were all killing it, you wouldn't be worried about a sales methodology as much. But what is that persona-based messaging? The sales methodology that I've had a ton of success with, I learned it a long time ago as a Microsoft sales leader. They actually brought one of the authors of it up to Seattle, took a bunch of us through. I used it at Intuit with my sales team there. And it was actually one of the reasons I'm in sales enablement today. I was using it with my sales team at InContact, and my EVP liked how I was developing my team. It's a funny story. I went in for my one-on-one one Friday morning. This would have been Q3 of 2012. And he wrote sales enablement on his whiteboard. Stephanie, I had to go Google it later. In fall of 2012, I had not heard that term. But then he explained to me that methodology and some other things I was doing as a leader. He said, I need you to go figure out how to build and scale this for the organization. And then, as you mentioned, so that was my first experience. And then I've gone on to do that a couple other large companies. And the thing that methodology I have attributed a lot of the success to is we meaning product marketing, sales enablement, rev ops, persona-based messaging and playbooks that the reps not only are exposed to going through the session, but they are role playing with it. We have them build a case study on an opportunity. One of them in their study group is trying to close using the concepts that we've been talking about that week. The workshops that I run are very interactive. They're in their seat maybe an hour at the most, and then they're up and either role playing, because I've written a role play workbook, or they are working on the case study using whatever it is we just talked and answer questions about in class. To me, it's behavior change. And if you don't, it's not training. And I'm a big subscriber to Roderick Jefferson's. I learned so much from him and reading about his work when I was getting into sales enablement. But his quote that you train animals and you enable humans, I just been one of my guiding principles. And so this is behavior change, but there's so much that needs to happen before a rep even sits down and cracks open that workbook to be
I
ready.
I agree 100%, especially something like a methodology. You're usually coming in and trying to change those behaviors, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
And that's not an easy thing to do. A lot of times, unless you've got a really fresh sales group of people, these folks have been through any number of other trainings, methodologies, whatever it is, and you're trying to come to the forefront of all of those and almost prove to them why they should care about this particular one, why it's going to help them. And I love that you mentioned that you only let them stay in their seats for a short amount of time. That's one of the things that I prescribe to in like my enablement practice is whenever I'm doing any kind of like training or whatnot, I want to make sure it's as engaging as possible, because really that's how most people learn, is by hands-on in practice. They actually see it in their everyday. I think that's a huge, huge piece when you come into like the implementation phase of a methodology and actually rolling it out. So let's take it back just a little bit to like
Mhm.
prior to implementation. When you're going about thinking of implementing a new methodology or a different methodology, what what's your thought process going into that? What are the things that you're maybe considering that you need to do? Like, how are you setting up that kind of program like roadmap for yourself?
I mentioned having the persona based playbooks for discovery. I have had the experience of working at a company where we had to develop those personas before we could write the playbooks. I have had the benefit of walking into a company where that was completely done and had been tested in the field and all of that. But one way or another, you've got to start with that. If you don't understand who your not who is sales just selling to successfully, but who should they maybe also be selling to successfully? Who should they be prospecting to successfully? And if you don't understand that only that, but what are at least the top three challenges, goals, outcomes that they are using our product to achieve? Then you can start to write those sorts of playbooks around it. Instinctively, good salespeople don't pitch, they have a conversation. Instinctively, good salespeople use a whiteboard. They don't use PowerPoint. And I'm not saying that using any of those things is necessarily bad. It's not. But how do you take that instinctually great salespeople know how to ask questions to understand problems and help a customer start to map out potential solutions? How do you bottle that and let everybody else tap into it? Because otherwise it's too easy to default to it. John Kerr wrote a great book, recommended to your audience, called Mastering the Technical Sale. He wrote it for sales engineers, but anybody would benefit from it. And he has a chapter called Dash to the Demo. Our salespeople want to do that, in the SaaS world especially. Right? So how do you help them change that behavior? And that starts with that: the personas, understanding them, having playbooks for them. The next piece is a good methodology will not just be about discovery. There's some great ones out there that I love their discovery piece, and then there's not a whole lot going on. You've got to be able to handle opportunity control. How do you expand your network into the other key players and negotiate that access? How do you take it through proof of concept, or take it through evaluation, and ultimately negotiate and close it? So if a good methodology is going to have all those things, which means RevOps needs to be in the picture. Whether you choose to enforce it through Salesforce or just have light gating in there, again, all of that needs to be thought through, considered. Is that handoff? What is your handoff criteria? Is it BANT? I would say no, not when I roll it out. And we could talk about BANT another time. But if that's the case, and you get everyone in the sales leadership and RevOps team to agree to that, well, then how does that affect SDR commit quotas and comp plans and stuff? So these are all the things that you need to be thinking through in advance. If you're trying to change from a methodology that already is there, and I'm assuming it's failed, because otherwise, why the exercise? the first thing I would start to do is do an autopsy on why, and then go into those other steps that I just said.
Yeah, I think I love that you use the word autopsy because it definitely puts this like image in my head, but it's so true. You
Mhm.
definitely need to kind of do this like debrief or postmortem. I've called it in some other cases on why exactly do we need to change? What failed about it? Was it maybe just the rollout like kind of flopped on its face, but there
Right.
was good content in there? Do you need to maybe do a relaunch, but instead of like a rehash of an entire new methodology? I love that you pointed that out. That's fantastic. So when you're going about kind of creating this process, and I would imagine a lot of times these types of initiatives are kind of drilled down from executives. If you are in enablement and you're noticing though that, hey, I think that our team needs more structure, which
Mhm.
in term usually means a methodology, how do you go about proving to an executive team, if you're maybe bringing in an outside vendor or if you're trying to do it on your own, how do you get that executive buy-in and prove to them that something like this could be worth their time and or money?
It's a difficult thing to prove, but I think that you can make a solid case. So again, going back, if there's a methodology that blood and treasure was spent on previously and there were no results, you're probably going to have a tougher sell. And I think doing that autopsy, understanding the why behind why it didn't succeed, and then building that into your case is critical. Even when there's not a methodology, understanding the outcomes that they're looking for is where I would start rather than taking anything to them in advance. So in your scenario, it sounds like they've maybe identified that there's a need, or it's a little bit too wild westy and that sort of thing. And then that's what I would do is I would sit down with them and say, these are the typical elements in a sales methodology. But before we start picking specific ones or vendors, I just want to understand what are the outcomes you're looking for? What are the deficiencies that your team has now? Another useful thing for that, something that we do, is a sales assessment rubric, where it's a simple spreadsheet, one tab for each of the team leaders, and it's got their reps down the left hand column. And in our case right now, there are 33 skills that align to our sales process stages, and all they do is go through and do a red, amber, green. So it's a RAG analysis, but it gives my team and I a great heat map twice a year on where we need to be focusing. So it could be a great tool for this, make it more specific to methodology, and have them complete that. But that's where I'd start, because as you pointed, having that executive sponsorship is critical. Sales reps don't work for us. I personally have no illusions that they, will feel obligated to do anything, even if they think it's good, that I talk about. When I was a sales rep, I probably wouldn't listen to me either. So having that leadership help you create that vision for them. And sometimes you can't create a vision. Sometimes it starts with, I'm doing this because Bill said, if I don't, we're going to have a really uncomfortable one-on-one. But if it's a good methodology and you've implemented it and you're helping teach the reps beyond that first workshop, eventually they'll see it. Oh, this is why I'm doing this. This is why, okay, I want to do this. That's the cool part about what we do, is when that light bulb goes off for people.
I agree. And I think getting that buy-in, anybody who comes into enablement, I know when I first started in enablement, I had these like rose colored goggles on. I was like, the sales reps are going to love me. They're going to do everything that I say because they just believe in everything that I'm doing. And I mean, it was a hard fall
Hard.
to realize that sales reps really, I mean, honestly, a lot of times they just don't give a crap. And and it's not that
Yeah,
they
it's
don't
fair.
appreciate everything that enablement does, because I've definitely seen that. They always do appreciate the things that we do.
I
But
agree.
unless you put it in the lens of how is this going to help me as a sales rep? How is this going to get me to the next level, get me to quota, get me to President's Club? If you don't put it in those perspectives, especially a methodology, they're just not going to be bought
No,
in on
it's just going to feel like
anything.
more busy work, just some other thing.
Exactly.
The public commitment that I've made to the sales teams, our sales teams are our customers, right? They're our internal customers. And the public commitment I've made to them, this is my third large program to have created and rolled out. And I'm very vocal about this, is that, guys, I will never ask you to step away from selling activities for any sort of enablement unless your leaders and my team are confident that it's going to help you be more dangerous and make more money when you get back in the field. If we ever fall short of that, please call me directly. And I'm very serious about that. And I think that they need to feel that and understand that we're not, okay, my HR friend, I'm gonna get flamed on LinkedIn. We're not HR. There are not trainings that we have to push out because the lawyers say we do, right? Everything we push out has got to tie back to skilling them up.
I agree. I think once you build that trust with your sales team, and if you're new to a company or a sales team, they will be very untrusting right at the front. But I think that's
Mm-hmm.
an important call out that you make is if they see something that you're doing or rolling out or whatever that they don't agree with, that they don't think is helping them, make sure you have that open line of communication with your sales leaders, your sales reps
Mm-hmm.
specifically too, and make sure they understand and they trust that they can come to you. That was one of the first things I did when I went to Divvy was like, I have an open door policy. If you have ideas, if you have feedback or whatever, feel free
Mm-hmm.
to come to me and talk to me about it because I'm only as good as you guys help me to be. Like I'm
That's a
here
great point.
for you. Like
Right.
this is my entire job. So anybody who's listening, maybe like an enablement who's going to a new company or brand new starting out, like forming that trust. I know we got like off on a little bit of a topic, but forming that trust definitely immediately with your sales reps when you're rolling out a big initiative like a methodology. Huge difference, huge difference. And at the very least, you can always find a champion, usually in your sales reps, and they'll help you win over the other ones.
The other piece I'd add in there is you need to get embedded with your frontline sales leaders. Any enablement initiative I've ever been involved in lives and dies with the frontline sales leaders. Because again, if it's not coming up in pipeline reviews, if it's not coming up in one-on-ones, it's going to be forgotten. And so those, both their input's valuable, but helping them see the why is so critical.
100%. Awesome. I'm loving our conversation so far. So let's talk a little bit about, we kind of touched on this a little bit. You mentioned for methodology, I'm going off script a tiny bit. You said that when you're training people or when you're kind of rolling out something like this, you usually have them kind of in seat for like an hour at like tops. Can you talk to us a little bit more about when you're rolling out a methodology, what all is included? Is there a like self-serve, maybe through your LMS system that you're kind of rolling out in addition to in-class or virtual training and then role playing? Like tell us maybe a little bit about those components, like right in the middle of rolling out a methodology.
My answer is a lot different than if you'd asked me this in February. The when you're rolling out a true end-to-end methodology, I still don't, even with great virtual technology, Stephanie, I still think that to really truly drive that behavior change, being together in a case study group across a table from each other and working on this case study, knowing that you're going to have to get up as a group and present it on the last morning, that sort of thing. I'll be honest, I have not found a way to completely replicate that virtually, and it's a critical component in my experience. That's when you start to internalize these concepts because you're applying it to something someone's trying to close. Maybe you do, right? And so you've got the case study work that's critical. You have role playing that's critical, and again, the role playing needs to be customized. They need to be having buyer conversations that they can relate to, because if they have been having them, they can see, oh yeah, I should be talking that way about things. If you don't customize it, again, I think it's just a hard sell for people to see, well, why does this apply to me? In the world that we're in right now, I'm still actually trying to figure out what that answer is. One of the things that we've tried is using, and then the reinforcement, then there's different tools I use for that. We can talk about that if we have time. But when rolling it out now, the one time that I've had a chance to take a group through it, we used a combination of LMS where they were assigned specific modules. These were professionally produced. They were very good. They had a workbook they downloaded. There were, tools and things like that. And then they would say, okay, you need to have topic or modules 1, 2, and 3 finished. We're starting on the 14th. You have to have it finished by the morning of the 16th. And then they are brought into a live 2 to 3 hour session, three's pushing it with breaks, where we have live coaching, that they're still doing that role playing out in Zoom rooms, or they are working, after that time in their case study group. I'll be honest, it wasn't perfect. Considering we had to react as quickly as we did, I feel really good about what we built. I think what we built was the best possible version of it. I don't know that I've got that code completely cracked, because I think there's still an element live. I'll be glad to share. This is what I'm working on for the next time. We're now in a position, at least in our company, where we're not going to be open until next June. They told us that last week, but that doesn't keep people that voluntarily and that sort of thing want to. So I'm experimenting with the idea. I've been talking with my CRO about, well, maybe we do a blended model. There's some really great technology schools are using, where they'll have socially distanced students whose parents are okay with them being in school in the room, and this new cool 360 camera, it's not even super expensive, that lets the teacher be up at the whiteboard. They don't have to be in a little box on a screen, and they're whiteboarding and they're doing all their things, and the students dialing in from home will be able to interact. When they talk, they show up on the screen. When someone else in the room interacts, it's cool. So that's my next step. That's what I'm blending, is do we do something like that? We have a socially distanced, safe room, and say who wants to come in and do this personally, and then we do something like that for everybody else. There's a lot of details to still iron out there, but I think that's the model that I'm going to pursue.
I love that. And I think this is definitely something, this world that we find ourselves in now, not only is it pushing, K through 12 teachers to kind of up level their game and their teaching, it's also pushing trainers, enablement people that maybe got a little bit comfortable, like even myself included. Like, this is just something I just assume I'm going to have all of my reps in office, like all the
Mm-hmm.
time, or I could fly them in if we started getting people outside. Like, this was just something I relied on. I could say, well, we just need them in person. We'd have to have them here. And I would just have everybody in person. And now that's
Mm-hmm.
not the case. We kind of have to push ourselves past these boundaries that we are forced to to find
Right.
ourselves, we find ourselves in. And I do think that this is going to, from, I mean, all levels, from like grade school all the way up through like college and business, this is really, I think, one of those pivotal moments in this type of engagement with people that is going to define the way that we do things moving forward. And we're going to fall on our faces quite a bit. I know I have, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's just going to be trial and error, and sharing these experiences and what's working and what's not working with the community at large, I think is super important to make sure that we continue to like up level ourselves moving forward. Okay, so we've talked about kind of prepping for rolling out in a methodology, mid, kind of like while you're in it, rolling it out. What about results? You mentioned quite a bit, like if you can't measure it, this was something that like my mentor, my old manager, Hillary Headley, used to say, if you can't measure it, it's not worth doing. And you
Right.
said something very similar. How do you measure the results of a methodology? What are some of the things that maybe you've done in particular to measure those results?
Your sales model is going to dictate that to a fair degree. But we looked at competitive win rates. We looked at ramp time, which is something that we all look at already, but we were looking at it specifically in how this methodology was going to help with that. And then we looked at the things you'd expect, like average contract value. And at that time, cross sell wasn't a big thing for us. The environment I'm in right now, cross sell percentage of opportunities with cross sell in them is one of my top line metrics that I'm tracking, because we're doing a lot of cross sell enablement. But we saw a methodology. The best methodology is the one you actually adopt and use. I'm prejudiced with the one I've had success with. You've got your successes. Doesn't matter, just use it. And what we saw by true adoption was that our competitive win rates, when any given quarter, we were about 50-50, just exchanging punches with our top three competitors. Once the thing was fully rolled out and the reps, it was part of our sales language and all of that, we saw our win rates spike. We were in the high 60s to low 70s against those same three competitors. And especially in SaaS, that's serious money.
That's
And so
huge.
those are, that's yeah, exactly. So that is, we saw a ramp time cut in half. Now, there were a lot of things going on. Remember, there was no enablement prior to that. Everybody sat in a room with HR for 2.5 days. There I go again, another HR flame. But there was nothing for sales. And so we can't attribute it just to that. But my belief is that by having those playbooks, discovery playbooks that talk about capabilities, not features, not slides, not a demo. We need to understand before we try and demo things that a new salesperson fresh out of academy could look at that, and all they got to do is follow the blueprint. And if they believe, they can't really ski too far past their tips. And that was part of why the methodology specifically, I believe, helped with that.
One of the other questions that I had too that kind of just like came up in my mind is there could be a number of different ways, like when you're rolling this out, as far as like how long the timeline is going to take. On average, in your past experiences, from prep to like kind of measuring results, like a full blown timeline, how long does it usually take, or how long do you give yourself to roll out a methodology in a really thoughtful way?
Wow, so many variables there. Again, partnering with sales leadership, rev ops, product marketing, and product is critical so that you guys are picking those timelines together and you avoid bottlenecks for the most part. How large is your sales organization? Is it entirely inside sales? Do you need to bring people in and do a roadshow? I've taught these out in London and Hong Kong, and right. So it just depends. Once you have that timeline, I'm trying to think at Vonage. Vonage was the biggest version of this I've done. It was about just dealing with the one route to market. It was about 10 months, I would say, start to finish. And by that, I mean that we had everybody through all the workshops, because you can only bring in so many people at a time and have it be a great experience. Then the things that I look for are the leading indicators. Yes, I talked about the revenue and all of that. They're lagging. Some of the things I've seen twice now, when you have the right methodology and salespeople are adopting it, is your customers start noticing it. And what I mean by that is literally, so my EVP of sales is in with a large customer doing that last, closing when you bring in the executives. And this is true story. He was multiple times having people say, Bill, your people were able to come in and talk to me about business problems. They were able to come and talk to me like a business person, not a salesperson. My salespeople can't do that. Is it a secret, or do you mind sharing? How did you enable them with that skill? And when we started hearing feedback like that, we knew the revenue would follow. One company I was working with, we had a very good win-loss analysis program. And again, a leading indicator is we'd start seeing people comment on the experience and commenting on the things that we've been trying to enable the salespeople to do. And sure enough, the revenue followed. So your leading indicator is going to be different than mine or than anybody listening to this. But that to me is part of the key, is you can't wait to see if the revenue follows. So what are the one or two things that you want to be looking for in advance?
That's really good advice. I think one of the things that is important kind of to note too, that I've definitely run into kind of in the startup world, not at Divvy, but like I've been at startups for the past several years, is that you kind of, and this is part of your executive buy-in, you need to make sure that they understand that in order to roll something out really, really well, it does take time. It takes planning and execution and like making sure that all of your ducks in a row. So as part of your executive buy-in, highly recommend that you make sure that you give yourself ample time to prep, implement, and then measure a program or an initiative like this. Otherwise, you're just kind of like rolling it out really fast, and then the reps are like, "What just happened?" Like,
right? Or they just go heads down, waiting for it to go by. Right? They don't
exactly.
And the other thing I would add is any good methodology has got to be auditable and scalable. And audible for most of us probably means Salesforce, but that's another leading indicator that I think is so critical. What are the inputs that they should be collecting along that buyer journey, and how are they documenting those in Salesforce?
I think that's great. And your RevOps team will love you for it. If you can report on it through Salesforce, you've got to win right there automatically.
Exactly.
Okay, so kind of like wrapping up a little bit, since you've done this a couple of times, a couple different companies, thinking back on some of the times that you've rolled out methodologies or something, can you pinpoint something that like really kind of surprised you or stood out to you when you were rolling one of these out?
We focus, and this is just an enablement thing, but something we help with. We focus as sales organizations far too much on our sales process when our buyer couldn't care less what our sales process is. And we need to focus more on that buyer journey. I'm not saying we give up control of the sales process, but if we understand that buyer journey, then we're going to be able to align to it and actually see more success. I watched a webinar with someone. If I told you his name, he's all over LinkedIn, you'd know. But he had a very good point. He said, if you are using closing techniques, if you're using closes in the traditional sense, then you're not doing it right, because you didn't align to the journey. You didn't understand what the what the gap was between doing it today, doing it later, and you're not going to succeed nearly as often. And I absolutely agree with that.
That's an excellent point. I think everything should start with the customer journey and then form around that. Because if you try to do it the opposite way, everything starts with your sales process, your methodology, your customers are going to feel so just pushed around into these weird buckets. I've done the exact same thing when I've been on the buyer side of the house going through an evaluation. I'm like, I'm not ready for that. Why are you making me do that? So any good methodology or anything I completely agree with you 100%. We might get some like people that maybe disagree, which is fine. I would love to hear some debate on that. But I do believe that everything should kind of start with the buyer journey, the customer journey, and then build from there.
I'm a pragmatist, Stephanie. I was in sales a long time, and I know that there will be times when you just got to bring the deal across the line by the end of the quarter. It's just, I know that's never going to go away. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that, but the difference to me is that's not your default. Unnatural discounting is not your default play. That most of the time you're able to do it the way that you and I are talking about, and then other times you hold your nose and you do what you got to do. But
yeah, quarters will always be there. End of years will always be there, or end of month. But I agree with you. If you've got kind of your good, solid process in place, and you understand your buyer, then everything else should kind of follow behind it. So I have really enjoyed this conversation, Paul. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights over the past several years that you've kind of been taking advantage of this or doing this. One of the things that I think is most important that I like to leave my listeners with is an actionable takeaway that they can take from this and implement in their own practice, like the very next day if they wanted to. So what's an actionable insight that you could give some of our listeners to take away?
I've already mentioned the absolute necessity of being able to tie enablement strategies and programs to revenue. Only a salesperson creates revenue. To be really clear about that. But as sales enablement, we need to be able to show reasonable correlation. And if that's not something that you're already doing in your program, not you, but anybody in the audience, that needs to become your number one priority. The benefits for you and the program and the salespeople are multiple. Number one, you'll be talking to your sales executives in their language. They don't really want to hear about trainings. They want to hear about revenue. You'll be able to be seen as not just the department of broken things, but as an actual member of the revenue team. And that's night and day in the things that you're able to do and resources you're able to request and that kind of thing. So start there. And don't feel like you need to do it alone. There are so many great online sales enablement resources. Tap into those. I learned from some leaders in the field when I was learning it. I'm still learning. Use your LinkedIn network. Use some of the Slack groups that you and I were talking about, but don't try to do it alone. There's a lot of folks out there ready to help you.
Amen to that. I've never met a more giving community, like professionally, than the sales enablement community. Everybody who's been in it for decades, before it was truly a thing, before sales enablement was a thing, all the way to like brand new folks that are just learning. Everybody is just so giving. Paul, thank you so much for joining us, or joining us today. It's been great having you on.
Thanks, Stephanie. I had fun.
Awesome. So if you want to connect with Paul on LinkedIn, feel free. Paul actually also runs the Sales Enablement Society podcast. So make sure you kind of connect with him on there and listen in on that. And then if you or someone that you know in the enablement community would be great to highlight on this show, please tag them in the comments or the thread below. And be sure to connect again with Paul on LinkedIn, or he's also in the Sales Enablement Squad Slack channel. And until next time, keep building, everybody.